Hey, podcast listeners and podcast watchers on YouTube, on Spotify, on everywhere that you are getting hold of this content. We are here today exploring the world of outdoor movement and fitness with our guests Adrew and Gill from Wildstrong. We're going to be discussing how you can reconnect adults with playful and natural natural movement. We're going to be looking at what role community plays in outdoor fitness, and we're going to look at how we can challenge traditional ideas about, in all the air quotes in the world, correct exercise form. So get ready for an inspiring conversation about building strength, confidence, and connection in nature. But before we get into that, we've had an email from a listener, Wen.
We have. We love emails from listeners.
This person has gone to theforestschoolpodcast.com after not our most recent episode, but the one before that.
About non-judgmental spaces.
About non-judgmental spaces. So Sarah from Bath has said, "Hi, I really enjoy the episode on creating non-judgmental space, but I'm still trying to figure out how you handle situations where someone might say something harmful or triggering. How do you keep things safe without coming across as judgmental yourself? Would love to hear more about this. Thanks for all the great content." Thanks, Sarah. Do you want to kick off with any thoughts about how you deal with those things?
Yeah, I thought that was a really great question because I think early in my forest school journey, that was something that I definitely struggled with in terms of just responding to situations in the way that you might see adults respond in a more mainstream situation. So just like trying to shut things down, trying to be like, oh, we know we don't talk like that here. Oh, no, we don't do that here. Basically kind of slightly verbally stamping on the person who is saying something that could be construed as harmful or upsetting. And now I think my go-to is quite declarative and to draw attention to the recipient and to try to, because then you're kind of helping the person who has said the thing that might have been hurtful. You're helping them to see the effects of their actions. And so rather than just, it's again, that thing is of showing the child your thought process as an adult with a bit more social experience, isn't it? So going, I'm just looking at so-and-so's face. I'm not sure that they liked hearing that, or I'm not sure that's made them feel very happy. And, person, is that
or
is
even
that right?
Sometimes offering that out and going like, you going, whoa, hold on a second, 1 second, guys, you look like maybe this is upsetting. How are you feeling? So that you're immediately getting into a mediating role.
Yep.
Because even sometimes just putting a pause on things gets people to then, you've stopped the flow of back, forth. You can just kind of come in and not judge, but just go like, okay. And sometimes we found that it can be helpful to suggest moving to a different space, particularly if like the judgments are coming around or like the friction is around like a thing or a, particularly because our woods is not flat. Sometimes you can unintentionally have one person being physically higher than another person and going in and going like, okay, I wonder if we can just readdress this, but would you be able to come over here? I was going to say that I think the biggest thing that I try and model now is like, if you take it from the, whoa, as you come in and establish a space, I think, the traditional thing would have been to sort of model that your role is like to discipline and curtail and do whatever. But now my main thought is like, how do I model that I'm here to be compassionate and holding space? And so rather than going to like addressing the like, oh, we'll put you down, you need to be stamped, to go the other way and go like, are you okay? Do you want me to take you somewhere else? Do you want to go over here? So that like, not that person's getting like, I wouldn't like blank them and be like, I don't talk to people who are, but to go like, my main role now is to go make a safe space for this person, model that if we need to like go to a different place, if we need to like stand with you, or if you need me to sing a very loud song, just to kind of like break the tension and make sure that you are not hearing, stuff that's making you upset. Maybe that would be my kind of vibe, in a way that is not necessarily directly judging it, because you are in some ways showing a judgment just by the fact that you're stepping in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's an unavoidable level of like, you didn't jump in when I said that, I'm going to be the red Power Ranger, but you have jumped in when I've said you're a stupid butt face.
Yeah.
There's a judgment there.
Yeah.
You know?
And then I think also there's what we've done in our practice is that if something comes up often, that kind of warrants a whole community discussion at the start of the day or over snack or lunch or whatever, to kind of bring this to the table, like you're bringing something to a meeting and go, we've noticed this, what do you guys think? And actually loads of kids will come up with some really interesting observations or ways of moving forward, and that you can kind of move into the role of like minute taker or kind of mediation and that kind of thing.
Space holding, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Space holding.
Yeah.
Space holding is, I think, quite often the way to not judge.
Yeah.
Is just to hold the space. That's great. If you listen to any of our episodes and have a thought that you want to ask us, or you're like, can you say a bit more about that? You can go to theforestschoolpodcast.com. There's a contact form in there. We love getting all these emails from different people. We love getting all these like, hey, tell us more about this type of question. But for now, we're on with Andrew and Gill, learning about how to be strong and agile and dexterous out in nature.
Enjoy.
Hey, did you know you can become part of the Forest School Podcast community by joining us over on patreon.com/the Forest School Podcast? You'll get exclusive access to behind the scenes content, have a chance to connect with us and with other listeners. Head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Forest School Podcast to find out more about what we're offering over there.
We are here this morning with Andrew and Gill from Wildstrong, and we're really excited to speak to them today. Andrew and Gill are all about getting moving and connecting with nature. I'm really interested in the kind of crossovers that might come up between what you guys are doing and what Forest School are doing. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about Wildstrong and what led you on this journey and what you do?
Do you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay. Hi, thanks so much for having us on. We started Wildstrong informally, I guess just before COVID, and it was Andrew comes from a kind of fitness background and a public health background, which I guess we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And I've always been very happy outside and moving, but never really enjoyed any kind of formal exercise before. And I think I needed something post having children that would kind of get me outside and give me a reason to go outside every week and kind of socialize and move a bit and get stronger after having kids. But the idea of sort of going to a gym or a boot camp never really, just didn't really tick my boxes. And so we started a very kind of informal group, which initially actually, because our kids were doing Forest School, we kind of thought, this is a bit like Forest School for adults, but much more kind of really focused on the movement and that time in a space that you know you're going to see the same people every week and spend time through the seasons kind of having a nice time and noticing how the seasons shift and how you get stronger over time, and teaching people how to kind of learn to fall and lift and jump and balance is a kind of big push of ours. And then we've kind of formalized as we've got a bit bigger and stuff. You can take over now.
As Jill said, so I guess one of my first jobs is I worked as a teacher, and I was really steeped in student-centered approach and things like that, which I later learned is really sort of complementary to a lot of the Forest School ideas. And then after teaching, I got into fitness, personal training. I was a CrossFit coach for about 10 years or something. And I think I got into that because I sort of recognized that the way we talk about fitness and physical activity is really lacking. It kind of misses this big point. There's sort of this assumption that you're supposed to be in a gym and you're supposed to count sets and reps and you're supposed to do these specific movements. And it's really this sort of imposition of sort of like industrial logic on the human body. It's like, you do your biceps, you do your triceps, all these things. And it never sat well with me. So when CrossFit came along, I really liked that emphasis on, on community and sort of people doing things together. But there was still like a lot of aspects of it that never quite sat right with me. There's still this assumption you're supposed to use barbells and you do these movements and, you've got these points of performance and the coach tells you what to do. And eventually I kind of realized that whatever the fitness industry was doing, it wasn't really solving societal problems. So I got into public health. I went back, retrained in that, and was working for NHS actually when COVID happened. And I realized I was just spending all my time behind a computer, looking at statistics and things like that, and just realizing, I also feel like I'm not making a difference here. Jill, she started doing her group classes, and I realized like that it's making such a difference in the community at a local level to kind of give people access to green space, kind of invite them to come out, talk to each other, move, have a good time. And that actually resonated much more with me. And I think Jill kind of discovered a really good balance between all the things I was interested in. So she asked me if I wanted to come along and do it. And our big emphasis is getting people outside, moving, spending time with each other, trying to kind of recreate that sort of third space that a lot of adults don't have anymore. A place where they can make friends and meet people and kind of be in and out of their comfort zone and share and learn and things like that. But it's a space that's hard to find now, especially if you're not religiously inclined. And, most people aren't members of any sort of, most people aren't members of Elks clubs or Rotary clubs or things like that. So it was just our attempt to try to bring back some kind of local club organization, civic organization, whatever, but through sort of under the umbrella of getting people to move and seeing what comes out of that, seeing if once you start getting people to move together, can you start a community garden? Jill's been organizing litter pickups the last few weeks, and she's been doing that.
Yeah, it's been good.
Or, can you sort of, is there any way that you can kind of create these little resilience networks? So just like little things, like if someone feels like, the example I always use is a few years back, one of our members, their husband broke their leg in a motorcycle accident. So the people in one of the communities were able to come together. They got some money. They helped them with some cleaning. They helped them with some food. And it's one of those things, had they not been a part of something, they would have been by themselves. So how can we get people to not feel like they're by themselves while also moving and having a good time?
Wow. Yeah, gosh, that sounds like, the nub of it is about moving, and then you're describing how it's kind of spreading out into this network of so much more than just an exercise group, a movement group. I was just wondering, as you were talking about, obviously that ties in a lot with what we do in terms of community building and connection with nature and being outside. But it really, as you were describing it, I was wondering how you sort of describe the group and how easy or difficult you might have found it to spread the word and actually get people to join, because the way you were sort of speaking about it, as you say, it's kind of uncommon for us as adults in society now to be part of groups like that. And in order to try to define it without maybe freaking people out or maybe making them think, what is this? This is kind of weird. Because we definitely have that thing. Like once people come, they get it and they love it, and it ticks so many boxes for things that make us as humans really thrive, doesn't it? But in order to try to get people over the threshold in the first place, well, there's no threshold because you're outside, but to kind of get them to understand it's okay. We're not a cult. it's really great.
We've had the exact same conversation. Yeah. Once you start talking about like mutual support networks and coming together and, non-hierarchical teaching, it's like, what is this a cult? And, that's why the movement and fitness actually works very well, because, we always talk about how we use the fitness and the movement as a hook, because people already have the schema of like a boot camp or whatever. So you get them in sort of with that. And then over time, you sort of layer in these other aspects, and not everyone's interested, and that's okay. You have to meet people where they are. Some people come and they use it very much as if it were essentially a boot camp with maybe, a wider variety of movements. And then some people really get into it. And I guess that's when we can start talking about the peer coaching model and stuff, but I'll let Jill talk.
I think, it's a good question about how you get people in. I think initially when we first started, we had all these different kind of ways of like, well, it's sort of this and sort of this, and we kind of create support networks. And now we do lead with the exercise, but we often don't use the word exercise, because actually the people that we are aiming to bring in and that are our core members are people with sort of some exercise history, and that they're comfortable being outside and they like going on walks. Maybe they go on runs a little bit, but they don't see themselves as kind of fitness people. So it's trying to get that balance, and I think it also, we always start with the women, and that is now sort of our strategy whenever we build up a group, but the women tend to sort of come together more naturally and more easily. And then we see with every group that grows, if you start with the women, they will bring their partners over time. So after year one, you'll start seeing the guys coming in. I think initially the guys kind of think it's some sort of bums and tams in the woods or something. And then they come in and they're like, oh, okay, this is a whole different thing to what I was expecting, and actually it can be really joyful and really challenging, and they get a lot out of it as well. But we definitely find starting with the women, generally they tend to be more inclined to build groups.
And it's kind of something we stumbled upon, because it's nothing that we set out to do, but it's like Jill said, that's just sort of how it happens organically. It's kind of easier to get in. Now, that being said, we have a few communities. Luke, you know,
we have one all male.
Yeah, we do have one all male community. So one of the coaches who trained under us, you know, has been doing a lot of work with men's mental health, you know, and fire circles and things like that. And he's used that to really good effect. And, you know, one of the things that he's done really well is sort of starting off with these discrete, like 8-week programs. So 8-week programs, and, you know, people come in and they focus on different movements. First, they learn how to, like, you know, different ways to pick things up, or different ways to, you know, get over logs, to climb, to fall, whatever, you know, he has these specific skills. And then from there, he starts building it up. And that's worked quite well for us as well, getting in different communities. So sometimes we'll do sort of programs to get in older adults, you know, 65 plus. And obviously that looks like a much different group. And we don't really even have to say what we're doing. We just get them out and they just like start talking. And oddly enough, with older adults, we end up playing much more games than we do anything that looks like any kind of workout. But then at the end, we'll all meet up for tea or coffee and sit around and talk. And it's nothing you need to say explicitly. They just sort of realize the importance of just sitting down and talking, and then checking in on each other. So it is something that can happen organically, even if you don't tell people. That's the purpose.
Right. That's interesting.
And that kind of stuff can be so, it can be so hard, can't it? When like you were saying about not necessarily keeping exercise in gym or like commercial spaces, but like those spaces are so, like lots of businesses are, you know, so like trying to be efficient with time and with money and whether else. So it's like, if you finished your class, go. You are like absolutely leave the thing, because what you're here to do is to do the exercise thing. And so like blending all those, like you say, like that third space that can be multi-purpose is going to be so beneficial, and something that it's definitely missing for a lot of people. It made me think about, I was reading I can't remember the book I was reading a while ago, and it was about like how much humans it's exercised. And it was about that's the one. And they were talking about, and it sounds very similar, like the amount of like just normal day-to-day kind of like, if you want to put a word on it, like chores, you know, like sitting around and weaving or sitting, but they're all, you know, even the going out to go foraging or go hunting, but it always involves communication as you're doing it. Whereas the kind of Western experience of exercise is like in your silo, talking is a distraction. You're there to be like top, go. Even like, so a bit like you, Andrew, I obviously did a bit of exercise at school, and then when I restarted exercise in my 20s, I started out with some CrossFit stuff, thinking that it would be that like community thing, but it didn't take long before it starts to be like, oh, you're actually kind of decent at this. Now stop talking. Now go. Which is just super interesting, isn't it? Do you find that people are coming to you? I know you said you don't have to tell people exactly what you're doing, but are people coming to your courses with not maybe goals, but maybe like in their minds deficits that they would like to work on? Like, do you have people arrive that go, I can't pick things up, or I want to be able to run for longer? Or do people just come with a general, I would like to be gooder at moving?
Gooder. I think so. People that come to the classes, for the older population, kind of over 65s, we always start with, each set of classes will start with kind of going over the movements that they think about a lot, or that cause them a bit of worry in day to day, and we'll kind of make a mind map of those at the beginning and kind of work out a plan over time of how we can kind of practice those and expose them to little bits of those movements so that they can kind of build up their confidence again. And with the older population, you can almost, I mean, we could almost, you know, draw out the mind map. It's all sort of getting in and out of the car, getting down to the ground, you know,
playing with grandchildren,
doing the gardening,
grocery shopping, gardening, yeah.
All of those kind of things that give them, or balance generally, which kind of feeds into all of it. And it gives them quite a lot of worry, and they kind of stop participating quite quickly. And so it's kind of helping them practice a little bit so they can get their confidence up. And that feels very sort of, we talk about that kind of task-based training. It feels really tangible to what their life is, where they are in their life. Whereas with younger populations, I'm saying under 65s for younger populations.
Yes.
You made it, don't worry.
I think there's a growing awareness, particularly amongst women, that as you get into your 40s and things, you need to be stronger and you need to be sort of moving more. And I think, Lewis, you said actually really nicely, like with CrossFit, it's very extreme and it can be quite miserable. It's that sort of idea of like exercise can only be really effective if it's sort of miserable.
Yeah.
But that's only because we've done such a good job on a society level of removing so many movement opportunities from our lives. And, you know, here we've all got jobs where suddenly we've got to be behind a computer. And
it's
we're not
a bit
really
Calvinist as well, isn't it? That thing of like work will set you free, and like
all
those moral judgments of like you're a better person if you've suffered, that kind of like morality.
It comes through that sort of self-flagellation, and people see value, and a lot of times people won't see the value in a workout unless it is slightly miserable, you know. And I think a lot of our assumptions about exercise did sort of come out, you know, if you look when people start talking about it, you know, a lot of it did come out of the 1800s, early, you know, 1900s, you know, so you kind of see the tensions with that. And there is that sort of like, you know, people do have that sense of moral superiority if they do exercise. So it is all tied up in that. You said a few good things. I was just taking some notes and I thought you made some good points. I just want to talk about them. You were talking about gyms and this idea of efficiency. And I think one of the best distinctions I've heard, I think it was Catherine Knight who first said it, but she talks about this idea of place or space versus venue. You know, this idea of creating a place for people, you know, where they can come and feel like, you know, they have some ownership, it's a part of their community, as opposed to setting up, you know, a venue where you pay a transactional fee, you come in and then you get to use the gym. And I think so many of the opportunities for physical activity that people have are venue based, as opposed to, you know, people feeling like it's part of who they are, it's part of their environment. And then, you know, the follow-up point to something you said, we use this term quite a lot, which is this idea of social movement. And it's exactly like you said, so much of the way that people get movement now is completely decontextualized. You know, it's like I'm using a leg press machine, I'm doing, you know, 3x10 curls, you know, and I sort of hope that will turn into some kind of skill or capacity or competence, you know, but it often doesn't. But if you think in the past, as you said, the way people would have these movement opportunities, it always would have been embedded in the community, whether it's like, you know, gathering together or farming together or dancing or doing a barn raising, all these things, none of them would have been done in isolation. And you're right, you know, you go to the gym now, you pop on your headphones, maybe you drive your car, you go in, you don't make eye contact with anyone in the changing room, you do your stuff, and then, you know, you're out of there, and that's it.
And just to jump in on that, like I think so when you're sort of working with kids like in the woods and you're kind of teaching them new skills, and you can see that they've kind of got the kernel of this new skill that they want, and then they start seeing opportunities for that skill in other places, and it kind of makes them look at the world differently. And you can do that with adults too. And I think a lot of us, because we haven't moved so much and we've become a little bit worried about how we would get over this wall or get under this fence or lift this thing, once you start reteaching people how to kind of give themselves the permission to move, you'll suddenly, I mean, I'm saying this as somebody who got into this, you know, late 30s, early 40s, and now I've just really discovered that I love jumping over stuff. And had I realised that parkour was a thing in my younger years, then I would have been all over it. But I'm now starting to get into it. It means that when I go for a walk, I'm actively looking for ways to like get, you know, how can I get over this fence in a different way, or sort of creatively move along this track. And suddenly I feel like I'm looking at these places that I've lived in for years in a completely different way, because there's so many different ways I could interact with it rather than just go for a walk.
Yeah.
Sounds like my bloody 7-year-old there, and that sounds incredible. But sometimes with my 7-year-old, I go, "Could we go from A to B in a slightly efficient way?" And he's going, "Yeah, but I could spin jump off this, and
Exactly.
what I could do." Yeah, I get it, mate. I get it. It is fun,
It's
but
funny
Can
because
you imagine how fit we would all be if we moved like
just a
our
constant
5-year-olds
running around, up and down, crawling.
getting onto a street and running as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah.
well, I think women, I do a lot of that. I think you would say women, I've definitely in the last few years been more up for, because we have kids that come to the woods, and like, as is quite common, you have a lot of kids that go to gymnastics classes or dance classes or whatever, and they will model for you and go like, they just because that's what they're used to doing, you know, they just kind of go like, I'm going to do a spin, la, la, la. And women, I think, would you say women were better in the last few years of going, well, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. I'm 16 and a half stone. I'm going to fucking have a go at that.
Yeah.
Right, watch this. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
to throw yourself at it is really important modeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it is funny because, you know, Jill talked about it a little bit, you know, this idea, this fear avoidance cycle you see a lot, you know, like people sort of contract as you get older. You know, you start to develop that fear of jumping, that fear of falling. You stop putting yourself in situations where you can do it. And you kind of see how it creates this sort of feedback loop over time, you know, eventually where people are sort of afraid to run or do anything. And you can get that back. And I've noticed the same thing as, you know, someone who's been in you know, fitness and CrossFit, you know, that sort of stuff for a long time. I was never actually that good. I'm still not that good at moving, but, you know, I was never that good at moving, you know, and I noticed I really developed a kind of stiffness. And you see that in gym people sometimes, where they're sort of always braced. They're always ready to do a deadlift or a squat. But they can't really do a lot of spontaneous movement. And then I just realized it's like, actually, you know, if I just try to do a cartwheel, you know, I guess what was really liberating for me, and we spent a lot of time doing it, is really focusing on learning how to fall and learning that it's going to be okay if something happens, and just like allowing myself to try jumping on something and then rolling out of it. And all of a sudden now, if I, you know, I remember the last day of school over summer, all the kids were doing cartwheels and they were trying flips and everything like that. And it was really fun to go out there and try it. And, you know, maybe I didn't nail it, but it was also quite fun when you're with a group of kids and, you know, you hit a handstand and you walk and then you bottle it 2 minutes later. But it's great. And you're right, for the modeling, it's so good because it shows kids that this is possible and you can keep on doing it, and that adults are allowed to have a good time.
Yeah, like and the crossovers there with play, you know, like that's what drives kids to kind of do this kind of stuff, isn't it? It's so playful, and because their bodies are changing all the time because they're growing so quickly, every day they wake up, their body feels a little bit different. So they've got to test that out and see how it feels and see how much stronger they are today, or how much faster they can run, or how their sense of balance has changed, or the center of gravity's changed. And then, as adults, that, as you just described, you know, that the reverse sort of happens, that maybe every day you're starting to go, oh God, that feels sore when it never used to. And oh, this feels like a bit scary. And so, it kind of declines in that way, the opposite to childhood, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, that's because kids hurt themselves in impressive ways. They're like, oh, how did you do this? Oh, I flew off a tree and I span round. Yeah. Adult injuries are like, I bent down to pick up my shoe and I've
slipped a disc.
And that's it. Now I can't walk.
But the play is interesting. We have actually, speaking about words that we struggle with, when we talk to people about what we do, we can't lead with play. People get really confused with it, and I think it kind of, every time I've done if I've sort of posted something in like Facebook groups for local groups, if there's the word play and there's pictures of adults doing it, 100% of the time I'll get a message going, is this for kids?
Yeah.
And I think people just really shy away from it, and I know what it is, because I know that if I'm at a conference and someone says, right guys, it's time to do, you know, we're going to play a game all together, and I'm like, oh, please don't make me do that. And I just sort of hate it.
It's the fear of like enforced fun.
But then there is something very joyful about, and again with the older population, it works so well, because by the time you're working with over 65s, everybody that comes in there will have a very complex history of like injury and you know,
something's not going to work.
Something's not working. Definitely a few things are not working. So you can't have one thing fits all for everyone. So we kind of do a lot of this peer coaching where we work on a skill together, which kind of takes them out of this stress zone. So they'll just go and have a chat and kind of work out how to pick up something in different ways. But then we'll come back together and we'll play a game, but we don't talk about it up front. We just talk about it at the end of it. We're like, right, we're just going to play this game now.
Yeah.
And often you'll find with these things that we like, with the falling, which is something I find I struggled with. It took me ages to get out of my head. But with the falling, if we play a game around it, and it's just kind of unstructured and you're just trying to fall in different ways, suddenly I can do my shoulder roll because I wasn't trying to think, oh, okay, I need to get my hand in here and then I need to get my neck like that, and it, you know, and you're I break it down and then I completely just can't find the switch to switch off. Whereas if you get adults into a place where they can play and allow themselves to play around with stuff, we still have that capacity that we have as children.
Yeah,
we just don't.
you just need to get out of your head. You know, one of the sayings, I can't remember who told me, but, you know, this idea of not letting the old man in, you know, which is like, you know, as we get older, it becomes easier and easier to say, I don't want to do that. I don't feel like it. And I feel like I'm naturally, I really want to let the old man in sometimes, but, you know, just really giving yourself those opportunities. We talk a lot about problem solving as well. Like sometimes before we introduce a game, we'll kind of say, well, we want you to figure this out for yourself. So we present some sort of problem, like, you know, and often it can be simple. Like essentially we describe floor is lava or any of those sort of obstacle games that kids really sort of like. They say, well, we want you to do this together. And people actually really love solving problems. I think that's how people kind of get into their flow state and sort of feel like they're useful sometimes. So sometimes it ends up being a game, but actually it's like, I want you to get, you know, X heavy logs and rocks from point A to point B, and you end up racing the other team or whatever. And it's a game, but you don't actually tell people that it's a game, and they end up having a great time anyway. But it is funny how culturally there's this aversion to talking about, you know, adults playing.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, we've got some exciting things planned exclusively for our Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast. If you want more in-depth discussions, bonus episodes and other exclusive content, head over to our Patreon and support the podcast. You won't want to miss it. patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast.
It's like
when you're playing,
I was just going to say the only socially acceptable way for adults to play seems to be through sport. It's like organised sport. We're going to do football now, and everyone goes, okay, cool. I mean, it is adults playing, and even like following a football team is kind of playing, but it's that's so okay and normalised. But anything that isn't that seems to be like weird. Bunch of weirdos. What are you doing? No. Sorry, Liz, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that when you're playing, like the adaptability and inclusion of stuff is just par for the course. In the same way that, like, you know, we talk about play, we're normally talking about younger people playing, but I've rarely seen young people play in a way that goes, well, you're not fast, so you can't do this and you can't do that. Like, more often it is like, okay, well, why don't you have this role in the game, or why don't you problem solve, you know, by going through this thing, or like, you know, one of the things so my wife did CrossFit with me for a while, and one of the things, so she's hypermobile, and one of the things that made her eventually stop was that the coaches made no you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Accommodation, thank you.
Perfect,
for her hypermobility, particularly in her like elbows and ankles, which are like, you know, stability points she can't brace. But if it was like game based and it was like, well, maybe you can do this and maybe you can go that way, then, like you're saying, if the solution is there, it doesn't matter if your body needs to do it this way and your body needs to do it this way. I was going to ask if you guys find that you are, because obviously Wem and I we're looking at like holistic education, so we're looking at like body and mind and spirituality and all of these different like parts that come together for a person. And one of the things I'm always interested in those different areas is, where do you find growth mindset, where do you find fixed mindset, and where do you find kind of like the accommodations? Because I feel like sometimes in the physical space you can be in that kind of like, if you were extremely growth mindset, you wouldn't do any accommodations, because you'd be like, you just got to get better at this, you've just got to go, you've got to like stretch more, you'll get there, stretches, and then but you need to have I wonder if you guys find this, but like finding that balance between like, what's a growth mindset thing in terms of, I think if you worked at this, we could get you to a place your body could do this, and what's like, okay, genuine accommodation, you have a false hip, therefore it's inappropriate for me to go stretch and stretch and stretch or push it and push it and push it. Do you know what I mean? Finding that how do you find that balance in physical movement between encouraging growth but also being accommodating of people's bodies being like, it's just not happening, I've got long arms, or I've got this kind of thing going on?
We've got two takes on that, I reckon.
Yeah, well, I've got a few, so I've written a few things down. There's a few things here, and I think one of the things, using your wife and being hypermobile as an example in CrossFit, is that in CrossFit, though they don't like to talk about it, they have a finite set of prescribed movements, and they have this idea of points of performance. And these points of performance come from the idea that this is how you do the movement, or else it doesn't count. You don't get a point or whatever. And those points of performance are largely arbitrary. Maybe they come through sports like weightlifting or gymnastics or whatever. But essentially, it comes from this idea of competition. Do you score something or do you not? With this idea of task-based training, or sometimes we talk about this idea of capabilities approach, we're just really looking for, well, how can you get the job done? And sometimes people lose the forest through the trees because they think, okay, well, squats are important, so I need to get my squats really high. But a squat is just one tool, essentially getting a heavy weight and bringing it up and down. There's not one squat. You have a resting squat, you have an athletic squat, you have a whatever, low bar, high bar squat, whatever, and that kind of reflects whatever the tools or instruments that you're using. The reason I'm saying all this is because sort of like, it's just like, well, can you do the task, So, in ecological dynamics, which is this, something that we dabble in terms of looking at coaching and making sense of the world and things like that. There's this concept of dexterity, but it means something really specific. When Bernstein talks about dexterity, what he's talking about is having multiple options to solve a movement problem. Okay. So, you don't. So the classic example that he uses is if you see like a blacksmith and he's swinging a hammer, a novice blacksmith, the swing will look the same every single time because he just has this very robotic movement. When people first start moving, sometimes they have this very robotic idea. But a master blacksmith, if you check his motion, he's going to be moving around. He's going to make all these little subtle changes all the time. It's like, I think, Nadal has this famous quote in tennis. He's like, I've never made the same shot twice. No serve is ever the same. No shot is ever the same because you have all these different variables. The court is different. The spin is different. It's a different opponent, things like that. So within that, if you ask people to solve a problem, they're going to be very, very good at coming up with a solution that works for them, and maybe it looks like a lunge, maybe it looks like a squat, maybe it looks like a deadlift. But that's a really important thing because not two bodies are the same, So if you're telling someone arbitrarily, I want you to do 10 pull-ups, well, what's the point of a pull-up? A pull-up is something that's seen as a functional movement, scare quotes, functional movement. But it's not like in real life you're going to walk and you're going to see a thin steel bar that's the perfect, that's like whatever, 28 millimeters in diameter. It's perfectly designed for you to pull yourself up. That's not how it works. In real life, if you're pulling over something, it might be a tree, it'll be a different angle. You're going to use your feet. You're going to get yourself over. So, a lot of times people have these abstract approximations of what movement should be, but they don't actually think about, well, is this actually creating movement options for me?
But I'm going to jump. Can I jump in there?
Let me say one thing, and then I'll finish. It's just in terms of motivation for people. One of the things we talk about a lot is this idea of the adjacent possible. So if you think of the zone of proximal development where you have those concentric circles of what's possible, just being in a community where people are doing things, moving heavy weights, doing impressive things, it shows people A, that it's possible, and B, that with time they can get there, if you give them the right support and everything. So I think that for a lot of people who aren't going to be motivated by sets and reps and arbitrary like numbers, like whatever, like weight or something like that, if they see somebody doing something, and if you give them the right support and if you give them the right scaling and you kind of push them in the right direction, they're going to be motivated to do that because it's something that is useful or interesting to them. Sorry, I'll let you talk.
I just wanted to go back a little bit on this idea of sort of right and wrong movement. And I think it really is embedded deep in this. When people come in, if they've come to any kind of fitness class before, they're always really worried, like, I'm not very good at, I bet I can't do this properly, or I bet I'm doing this wrong, especially around lifting heavy things. And particularly for women, there's a real sort of like blind spot, or sort of just a belief that we can't do it. And so whenever we go into a lifting heavy things class, and that will be kind of different odd objects, and how can we lift them, and working in partners to kind of work out a way to do that. when we first started, because we came from Andrew's CrossFit background, we had a very prescriptive way of teaching, and it was kind of like, right, you're going to want to get your bum down, you're going to want to get your chest up, nice straight back, all that stuff. And then since we've moved away from that to a more kind of ecological dynamics model of just like, here's some stuff that you need to lift and just figure it out with your friend. And then once you've been playing around for a bit in a kind of stress-free time and you've had a nice chat about what's going on in your life, then we'll come back and we'll kind of help a bit on like, okay, so if we want to like learn how to lap this, like get it onto your lap and then lift it up, then we can go over that and we can give you some points of performance. But the big thing, particularly for women, is this idea that I definitely do it. I do lift these things at home, but I'm definitely doing it wrong. And it's a real kind of fear that's sort of embedded in, like, I mean, there's loads of stuff, but I've been thinking about it a lot. This idea that you're gonna hurt your back, which is a very sort of societal belief around back pain, which is just really tricky topic. And mostly it comes from just this lack of confidence with movement and not giving yourself the permission to try things. Like most people won't hurt their back immediately because they're not going to be going into sort of Olympic style lifting of like lifting loads and loads of heavy weight repeatedly. Like, you just need to keep moving your back and yourself.
Yeah.
And it's sort of letting people give themselves the permission to kind of have that freedom.
And I guess that goes back to your question about the growth mindset, which is that I think a lot of people are not coming in this with a sort of, whatever anti-fragile model or sort of growth model where, a lot of people have this sort of blanket negative view of any kind of stressor, that it's going to be bad for you. They don't kind of allow for, the possibility that we have these sort of hormetic stressors that can induce adaptation. And obviously you have to get the context and the dose and everything just right. But I think that's the biggest thing is, people will make the most progress when they realize that they're not fragile, they're not made of glass, and actually they have a lot of leeway in how they can use their body. And I think that once people get that, it's really empowering.
Can I ask what does risk assessment look like in you guys' world? Because as you were describing this stuff and talking about like not being prescriptive in terms of movement, I was kind of reflecting on the fact that like in our practice, we're obviously dealing with loads of risks. Like risk is a huge part of forest school. And some of the things that we do, like whittling, Worm and I have definitely moved in our practice from a place of very prescriptive, like you have to sit with your knees like this, you have to turn this way, you have to being a lot more kind of like needs based in terms of like, we just need to make sure this isn't going away, you're comfortable and nothing's going towards you. Do you know what I mean? Like, or we might come up with those. But I'm also aware that some of our risk assessments for things like trapeze swings, when they're up like this, or and they can be a couple of feet off the ground, or where we might see kids trying to move. Our site has a lot of like just cut timber that might be between 4 and 5 foot long and a foot across. And I'm aware that some of our risk assessments will say things like, we show the kids how to properly lift the things, or we with the trapeze bar, we might be assessing stuff, and if you see someone going like suicide grip, like thumbs over the top, then I might then go, for me, could you put your thumbs around? So, but that's from me looking at it as a risk point of view and going, well, to my understanding, this is a safer technique than this. So how does that look in your guys' world in terms of like giving people, balancing that risk with giving people the freedom to explore what works for their body best?
Yeah. Do you want to go for that?
Well, I don't know if you want to handle the risk assessment.
Yeah, well,
things.
So for the populations that we're working with, most of the movements that we're doing are very kind of, what would you say, like sort of not advanced.
Okay.
So yeah, so the biggest risk generally is sort of rain and slippery surfaces off logs and things like that. So if we have a lesson that's all on balance and on sort of balancing along logs that are high up and it's been raining, we just won't do it.
Right.
So
sure.
So I mean, I think our risk assessment generally says, if we're doing the sort of ecological dynamics way of teaching, particularly around lifting, you make sure there's a coach there, and you think, and that coach will know to kind of look out if you think, oh, actually, you've been doing loads of those, like, well, why are you doing quite so many? That kind of thing will pull them back. But most of our classes are a kind of entry level skill with a lot of chatting. So we don't have any high level
Sounds good.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean,
I've seen some of the pictures on your website. Some of those people are jacked.
Oh yeah. Are they?
we might have one or two.
Steph's nearly 60.
Yeah,
She's
I'll tell you, we've got some people who do very well for their age. Yeah, risk assessment is tough because this is controversial, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. Is that a lot of this stuff isn't true? I mean, the nature of risk assessment is essentially that you're covering your back to make what you do legible to a large organization or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the theories that we have about safety and movement in physical activity are probably not true, and a lot of them are probably detrimental. So this, I guess the one I'll use is this idea of variability overuse hypothesis, which is this kind of idea that a lot of the injuries that we get in sport and physical movement are from people trying to recreate the same perfect movement over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So if somebody says, this is how you run, this is what a perfect stride looks like, this is what a perfect squat looks like, this is what a perfect whatever looks like, it's that repetition, that same movement over and over and over again, and not playing around with the boundaries and the variabilities and sort of responding to the environment. It's that can cause overuse, but also means that you're not strengthening everything else around it. So I don't know if you guys follow Katie Bowman at all. She writes very nicely, and she's very good and is worth looking into. And she talks about a lot of stuff in this space. But she kind of has this idea she throws around that any one time, this population, and CrossFitters will be a good example, are some of the most overtrained and undertrained populations. That you see these people, power lifters, who get very, very, very strong at the same three movements, but you take them out of their comfort zone, and they're very likely to get an injury because they just sort of train these movements to this form of ultra specialization. Kind of going back to what Jill says, we do a lot of general stuff, but a lot of the theories, and again, I don't want to get in trouble, but I'm not going to say this is true. Disclaimer: this is not the truth, but it's worth looking into. A lot of the theories that we have about back pain and protecting our back and bracing and things like that also are not true. They kind of come out of a very specific industrial style of logic. A lot of this stuff comes out of the movement efficiency, ergonomic time studies that they would have done in early factories and things in terms of
we did an episode a few years ago with a chap that was talking to us all about biotensegrity and all of this movement and everything being kind of really linked together, as opposed to the same hinge going in the same way over and over. That sounds similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's sort of about these complex systems working together and not trying to isolate things. But this idea that your body is or isn't supposed to do certain things, I think leads to a lot of trouble. And we see that people tend to always overcorrect, so a recent classic example is how up until maybe the early 2010s or something like that, everyone was afraid of knee over toe squats, and everyone was afraid of deep squats. And they thought, oh, well, if you do this, your knees are going to explode instantly.
Or lunges as well.
Or lunges, full range of motion stuff. And then what we actually realized is that, well, if your body has the capability to move that way, and if you're not, strengthening or adapting those areas, then you're creating this sort of contrast. A lot of times people get injured when there's an overtrained area next to an undertrained area, or a stress riser, or something that's overdeveloped, underdeveloped. It's the crossover point. So if, whatever, someone always trains squats to this certain position, and they get really strong, and then one day they have to go 2 degrees lower. If they haven't trained that's often what can cause the injury. Anyway, so people realize that actually it's probably quite good to get your knees over your toes.
Over toes, guys. Huge.
Well, I was going to say that's something.
He's massive.
It's huge, and it's a good example of how the pendulum always swings back and forth, and people tend to, overcorrect and undercorrect, and whenever you kind of have this public conversation. But another one is rounded back, so a lot of people have been taught that when you pick up, you have to brace your core, you have to keep your back straight. All these things, and that's true if you always walk around with your back straight and everything braced. But then you kind of develop the stiffness, where if you look at people who move the best, who have this sort of fluid natural movement, they work on, they round their back, they extend their back, they kind of challenge their body in all these different positions. And again, as long as you're not doing this over the top repetition, there's gonna be a lot of benefit in there. You're building this robusticity, you're building this anti-fragility, whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of this model, this basic assumption that certain positions or movements are bad, which causes a lot of these issues when people do get injured. So it's a tough one when it comes into risk assessment, things like that, because often you might be dealing with an organization that has assumptions that actually aren't really founded in reality. It's just sort of whatever's written, so
Yeah.
it's a thorny subject.
Yeah.
When Wem and I are out at events, we often have people come up to us and say, thank you so much for these episodes. They are guiding me through my practice or helping me keep sane on the pack up and put down. What can I do to say thank you? And if you want to thank us, the best thing you can do is head to our Patreon page and become a supporter. You're not just donating money, you're helping us to invest in better equipment, more research, and higher quality content. So if you head over to patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast, you can see how you can make a difference to this podcast and furthering what we're doing. Thank you so much.
That kind of reminded me, you were talking about, people feeling that they're fragile or that they shouldn't do certain things. And Jill, you talking about women especially going, oh, I'm sure I'm doing this wrong. It's that way that we sort of have lost touch with our own bodies, that there is some external weird mythical expert on movement who dictates how we, like, oh God, I wouldn't know how to do that unless I've had an expert teach me. So kind of your guys' approach of, having a chat about it with another person and trying to problem solve must feel quite alien to people, because they're sort of expecting this, thing from on high to dictate the way to do a thing, and we will practice that thing, and that is it, because you can't possibly trust your own body. I find that really a complete about turn in terms of how we look at exercise and fitness. I want to change direction a little bit. You were talking about kind of responding to your environment and talking about when it's been raining and what kind of things that you do. And because obviously you guys are, am I right in thinking you're always running stuff outdoors? It's a completely outdoor thing, obviously, like, talking about affordance theory and what different environments afford us in terms of movements, and kind of whereabouts you run your sessions, what kind of environments, and what different environments afford different kind of movements. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, in a way, it's kind of tied into what we were talking about before, so this idea of affordances is that you have these different environmental, facets, there's different parts of the environment, and they kind of elicit different behaviors from you. And it's what Jill was talking about at the very beginning. Once people start to pick up skills and capacities, they actually see the world differently. This idea of perception action, so there's all kinds of examples. You might use an example of an older, maybe an older relative or something like that, who's lost a bit of hip mobility, and they walk into a room, and if the only place for them to sit in a room is a futon, they won't even try to interact with the futon. They'll just lean against the wall or something like that, because they've sort of lost that capacity to interact with the environment. And then obviously the reverse is, as you get stronger, as you get more confidence in jumping and balancing and things like that, you see that there's so many more opportunities to interact with the environment. Whereas before you might have not noticed trees before, all of a sudden trees are something that you can climb. In the same way that, like, if you come from the city, a tree is just a tree, and then you start learning about trees, and you start learning that there's beeches and oaks and all these different trees, and they have these different properties, and you can interact with it in a much more rich way. And then at the same time, you sort of have these negative affordances that sort of stop you from participating in the environment. So maybe you could think of it as like a mobile phone or a tablet as something that would, the presence of that is going to prevent you from interacting with the environment. And, what you find is, as with all these things, it's a feedback loop. And with kids and adults, it's the same thing. There's this saying, play begets play, which is the more you play, the more you learn about playing and what you like, and it gives you more options. So, I think of, if you ever had relatives who visit you from the city, the children might not even know how to play outside. If you took away their iPads or something like that, they're like, well, there's nothing to do out there. I don't know how, like, there's just a bunch of trees and rocks, and what can you do? Whereas if you have kids or adults or whoever who've spent time in that environment, they could spend all day obviously in the woods and have a great time, because it's not just trees and rocks. It's like, oh, this is a great climbing tree, and here's some rocks you can balance on, and there's a great stream down here, and these fish, whatever. So what we try to do is we try to get people to start noticing the affordances around them, and it's useful for a few reasons. So people don't think that they need special equipment to exercise. People don't think they need the special bar or whatever this gadget is. That actually, if you're just outside with just a few things in the environment, you can get sort of all the physical activity you need, and it can be more nourishing in other ways because you can be doing it with friends.
A lot of natural stuff can also I feel like as you're saying this stuff, it's kind of clicking in my head that like so much more of the natural affordances that I encounter are a different level of robustness, and in terms of like the way that if we're doing this like experimenting with how we want to move things, lots of things like very high end tech and screens and all of this, they're kind of encouraging more and more like finesse movements and tiny things and touch the screen very lightly and be in control of this stuff. But if you're going to be experimenting with how things move, you need stuff
Yes.
like, I find that's often the main driver for me asking my children to move less sometimes, is that our sofas are not built well, because they're not
Yes.
because they're not built in the same way, or like they're going outside. Like we've got loads of equipment that I can't use because I am above the weight limit on
Yeah.
like hammocks that we have for the kids to play on in our house, or like if I sit on the sofa in the wrong way, well, I've stressed the joint in the wrong way. But going outside, yeah, there are going to be very dry sticks that will snap, but by
Yeah.
and large there will be natural things that you can go, well, if I get this wrong, it doesn't break.
Yeah.
And again, comparing that to like sometimes more and more complicated gym machines where like cables have to run through certain things, or you have to move
Yeah.
it at a certain angle, and it's very like,
Well,
sometimes when people go, oh, that's quite dangerous, they mean for the equipment. They
yeah.
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
mean
And
for you.
you're right. It's all about the context, because I think we've all seen situations where there are kids who sort of have a reputation as being problem kids in the context of a classroom, where they have to sit down and they have all this breakable stuff, and if they're too loud, the walls echo and things like that. And you take those same people, you put them outside, all of a sudden they're not problem kids anymore. I remember the first time, and this is funny because it's inside, but I remember the first time we took our kids to a bouldering gym, a bouldering wall. This is when we were living down south, and I just thought it'd be fun for them to do. And the classes were great. They were so hands off. You just had a group of 6, 7, kids, about 4 or 5, and they just were running around. And I thought that the people were going to say, oh, don't touch this, don't climb on this. But because the whole area has this affordance where it's made to be climbed upon, kids will naturally sort of limit how high they go, and they're not going to get that high anyway. They can bounce off the walls. They just let the kids run for 10, 15 minutes, get it out of their energy. And like, they weren't misbehaving, because in the context of the class, that was okay. In another class, you could say, well, these kids are really naughty, they're misbehaving, but it's completely the context and the environment. And, as to what you're saying about this idea of finesse and, electronic equipment and things like that, you really see it that people, even if people are strong, a lot of people are not great at power generation. What I mean specifically, jumping, throwing, moving heavy objects, things like that, because I think they are so used to sort of dealing with these fragile objects. The idea of like a ballistic movement of just throwing something as hard as you can, which you see how that could be useful in real life. A lot of people hold back. So Jill, you were talking about how people need to give themselves permission. You need to create an environment where people can give themselves permission to move powerfully and move quickly. And that's one of the biggest things. You see that people are kind of hemming themselves in because they are afraid they're going to break something. And the first time, they throw a rock or whatever, and they realize nothing breaks. Again, it's one of those liberating aha moments where people realize, like, okay, I'm not living in an environment where everything is fragile.
You see that within we run these family days, which are kind of, you bring your kids along, and we have these different, we'll do a big kind of warm up all together, and then play some games all together, and then we've kind of set up these different stations where they can either play a game at that station, or they can kind of interact with it in a way that they've got 3 or 4 minutes on it just to play around. And it's really interesting to see the kids that come over and over again know what they're capable. They kind of know what they're capable of, know what the kind of objects are capable of as well. Whereas the kids that come in for the first time, you'll often hear their parents being like, "Oh, don't do that," or or "Don't jump off there," or sort of, "Or you might break that." And it's like, "Well, it's fine. We're all in the woods, isn't it? It doesn't really matter. All of the stuff we just kind of built built by hand. If you
There's
break
a
it, we'll
depth in
fix
play,
it."
isn't there, where you go from what does it do to what can I do with it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can kind of see that. Yeah, I really enjoy watching that. Something I'd like to do more of is the classes we've been running here, just because of the age of our kids, is we're running classes for adults, and kids can come along too. And you see over the weeks, the kids will start in the class because they kind of want to be close to their parents. But as the weeks go by, we see less and less of them, and they're just in the woods over there. And so now the ones that come really frequently, that come every week, as soon as they get out of the car, they just disappear into the woods, and then we find them at the end. And that is really nice, because it's like, oh, you're all the parents are having a nice time, kind of chatting and catching up, and the kids are, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
but
and the kids can see the parents chatting, and they can see their parents moving, but they're also
you can hear them in the woods, but we're not doing anything with them, and it's that giving them that sort of space to kind of not be watched over and just kick about. I mean, I don't know what they do in the woods, but
they always come back.
Yeah.
So
Come back, so. Oh, this sounds so good. I wish I was closer. I would come to your sessions all the time. Oh, it's dreamy.
Thanks. We'll come and run your workshop.
Oh, yes, please. That would be fantastic. Yeah. Amazing. Oh, well, I mean, we could definitely talk for the whole day with you guys. But we, probably should let you get back to, whatever else you might be doing today on this rather rainy Thursday here in Devon anyway. In terms of our listeners and where they can find out more about what you guys are doing and how they might find out more about your work, where should they go?
They could just go to our website, which is wildstrong.co, just .co, that's it. And we could send you some links to some of the articles we were talking about, particularly Katie Bowman's stuff. And we've got some family movement guides and things that we could share with you, maybe in the description of the podcast.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. And Jill's quite good on Instagram.
I'm quite good on Instagram.
Yeah.
What I mean is she posts regularly.
Yeah.
I occasionally post on Instagram,
and We Are Wildstrong on Instagram, weren't you? Yes.
Wildstrong.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, we'll put all the links in the show notes. Oh, thank you so much, guys, for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
No,
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, it was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. So that wraps up our discussion with Adrew and Gill from Wildstrong. So a few key takeaways was that movement in nature can build community and resilience. We talked about how playful, problem-solving approaches to exercise can sometimes be more effective than the rigid prescriptive methods and gym-based activities. And we also covered how our bodies are also more adaptable and less fragile than we often believe. So I guess for us as educators and parents, we can consider how we might incorporate more natural, playful movement into both our daily lives and also into our maybe education programs or our family activities. And there were some recommendations for books and further readings from Adrew and Gill there as well, weren't there? About how we might create opportunities for children and adults to explore movement together outdoors. So if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or a colleague who you think might like it too. And don't forget to visit theforestschoolpodcast.com to leave any feedback or to suggest topics for future episodes or to ask us a question. It's super easy to do on the contact form there. And also, if you fancy dropping us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you listen to the show or on YouTube, that'd be really helpful for us as well. Thank you so much. And
Say the catchphrase.
See you next time. Oh, I forgot what the catchphrase is.
Stay
wonky.